And now it's time for our main program. David Brenner will introduce our speaker, Tom Burt of Microsoft.
I first encountered our speaker, Tom Burt, in college when we were freshmen, and he was on stage singing the male lead in the next dorm over's musical, The Mikado. And I stood next to Tom here while we were singing in our beginning, and I can tell you he's still got it. He has the golden throat. But then my next encounter with Tom was in 1984 when I moved out here to Seattle and joined a law firm then known as Riddell Williams. And Tom was the number 2 guy on a team of 5 lawyers that I joined that was defending some of the smallest utilities in the Northwest in the Whoops litigation. Who remembers the Whoops securities fraud litigation? Probably a bad memory for some of you who may have invested in the bonds. Anyway, that case was a super interesting one, in part because Tom realized early on, this was pre-email, that how important it was to command the data. And so he led the team of all these utilities in putting together a massive database, the largest probably ever assembled, certainly in this part of the country, during the paper years. Then, a couple of years later, I was on another team with Tom, which was fateful both for our client and especially for Tom. This was a lawsuit against Microsoft on behalf of our client, a Kuwaiti software company that was developing an Arabic version of Windows. And when the first Gulf War happened, the 2 engineers who were working on that fled to Paris, where Microsoft picked them up and hired them, notwithstanding their non-compete agreements with their Kuwaiti company. That was the first case in which Bill Gates was deposed and testified. Even though Tom was leading the opposite side, he impressed Microsoft so much that they sought to woo him in-house for the next couple of years and finally succeeded in 1995 when Tom became the head of all of Microsoft's litigation. Those were the antitrust years, and so Tom led the defense of the largest antitrust case the country had seen in those decades since the AT&T case. I think Microsoft learned a lot from that litigation, as we ourselves saw in the new Microsoft embodied by Brad Smith, who spoke here last spring. And Brad told us about some of the approaches Microsoft is taking to a careful and deep and broad view of the adoption of new technologies. One of those areas is cybersecurity. We heard again in last month from our own club member, Brandon Lee, about how the world of diplomacy and big business around technology has really started to come together in a kind of new way in which businesses and sovereign nations are working together on some of these global issues like cybersecurity, and how important it is for all of us to be aware of the new developments that are coming around artificial intelligence and this kind of quantum leap ahead in technology as a disruptor of everything we see. So Tom is our newest bookend on that conversation that Brandon started. Tom's current title at Microsoft is Deputy General Counsel and Vice President for Consumer Trust and Cybersecurity. He leads a large cross-disciplinary team of engineers, lawyers, policy advocates, project managers, business professionals, data analysts, and cybercrime investigators. Their goal is to advance customer security and trust in Microsoft's products and ensure compliance with internal and regulatory policies, as well as transparency with governments globally. Tom's team is formulating and advocating cybersecurity policy on a global level. They're advancing the Digital Geneva Convention that started in Paris last year, the Cybersecurity Tech Accord, and other global programs that are aimed at disrupting cyber attacks and supporting deterrence efforts. So I see headlines regularly. This morning, for instance, about Tom and his team's work. This morning it was about identifying the Russian hackers who, the same ones who did the Democratic National Committee documents, who went this Okay. There you have it. It's privacy. It's out the window. So, if you want to learn more after hearing, I invite you to read the book, which is Brad Smith's new book, New York Times bestseller, Tom tells me, called Tools and Weapons. And Chapter 5, Defending Democracy, actually features Tom and his team's work. So without further ado, let's welcome Tom Burt from Microsoft. Let's see if that one's working.
That one working? Nope. All right, we'll go with this one, which is good because I like to work from behind the podium anyway. So thanks for having me here. See if we can advance the slides. I'm told I have to wait for the delay. Here we go. So I wanted to tell you a little bit today about my team, what we do at Microsoft, but it really is to sort of continue the theme from the meeting that David referenced, which is the role that Microsoft is increasingly playing, and we believe the technology sector as a whole needs to play as diplomats in the space of. Now that one's on. This one working? Seems to be, maybe? Okay. If not, I can get rid of the mic and just speak loudly. But so I want to talk about the private sector diplomacy, which I think we are pioneering, which I think is going to be a continuing theme, especially for the technology sector, facing a number of the challenges we face as a society, as a global society, and talk a little bit about that and some of the work we're doing, and hopefully leave some time for questions. So let me start. We all know about the promise of technology, and really as we move to the cloud and what Microsoft thinks of as digital transformation, we are seeing enormous unlocked potential because the computing power that we can provide through the cloud, the services we can provide, the advances of artificial intelligence and machine learning, we can bring these advances to every enterprise and to every consumer, including in ways that haven't yet been invented. But it truly is transformative, and we're seeing that. We're seeing it in productivity. We're seeing it in creativity. We're seeing it in education. We're seeing it in communication and collaboration. The transformation that we are at the beginning of today due to the advance of cloud computing is really an enormous potential and a potential benefit to all of society. But there is, of course, with that, the dark side. And in particular, I focus on two parts of that: nation-state attacks and for-profit cybercrime. And what we are seeing is that increasingly the lines are blurring between these kinds of attacks as we see nation-states in their attacks sometimes more interested in extracting money or extracting, in the case of China, intellectual property in order to advance their economic agenda than we see doing other things like traditional espionage, but we see that as well. And as we'll talk about in a minute, we increasingly see nation states using cyber weapons in order to try to disrupt and influence the democratic processes of democracies around the world with a stated agenda, a stated goal of decreasing the confidence of the citizens of democracies in democracy as the foundation of society, of democracy society. So we at Microsoft find that there are ways in which we can engage, that we need to engage, that we should, as good corporate citizens, engage to try to combat these challenges. So let me just play this video very quickly.
We're living the dream of a connected world. But all around us, there's a battle being fought about what kind of world it's going to be. With a free flow of data, we're ever more vulnerable to manipulation, exploitation, and theft. If we're going to fight back, we'll need to work together. That's why Microsoft is committed to its security partnerships. Working with governments around the globe, we're taking a stand to defend democracy, ensuring votes are secure and verifiable, offering low-cost solutions to protect campaigns from hacking, and promoting trust and transparency on social media, fighting back against state-sponsored disinformation. Cybercrime is borderless. Through the convergence of technology and law enforcement, Microsoft is working to fill the gaps. Our Digital Crimes Unit uses analytics and AI to identify and disrupt online criminal networks, from deceptive phishing campaigns to online child exploitation, and has saved nearly 500 million devices from botnets. Alongside our peers in security, Microsoft has established the Cybersecurity Tech Accord, which calls for bold new measures to protect our users, and joined the FIDO Alliance, working with industry leaders to develop open standards for simpler, stronger authentication. We've also brought together the Microsoft Intelligent Security Association, an ecosystem of independent software vendors that shares vital signals and helps customers deploy the security solutions they need. In a connected world, cybersecurity touches every fabric of our lives. We all share a deep responsibility, coming together to strengthen it. For Microsoft and all our security partners, it's a world worth defending.
So that video provides just a quick introduction to the work of my team, the Customer Security and Trust Organization in Brad Smith's organization as president of Microsoft. And these are the subunits of the team, and I wish I had the time to talk about the great work each part of my organization does. I have more engineers in my group than I have anything else, but it really is a mix of engineers, data analysts, investigators, lawyers, policy advocates, and others who all join together to do the work that we do. But I want to focus today in particular on the work of my digital diplomacy team. And this is a team of policy experts that works around the globe to advance our view of what policy should be relative to cybersecurity. And as we talk about these particular nation-state threats, we have found, and we've really transformed this organization to help drive Microsoft's view of our role in the diplomatic effort of achieving what we think is an absolutely required goal, which is the adoption of enforceable rules that govern government behavior in cyberspace. Now, this is not a short-term project. Like many Microsoft initiatives, this is one that is going to take a very long time and consistent, sustained investment in order to achieve. But we're committed to the effort. It started when Brad Smith, about 2.5 years ago, first coined the term Digital Geneva Convention at a speech in San Francisco. And since that time, it has raised an amazing conversation around the world about whether a Geneva Convention that establishes those kinds of rules is truly needed or not needed. We believe it's needed. We don't think that we can get where we need to go until we get to that point where governments regulate their own behavior through agreement across the globe. And we know that there will be adversary governments that won't behave, as there is across the globe in many different arenas. But by isolating those governments and getting the rest of the world unified around the right rules for behavior, we think we can achieve much greater digital peace. So what are we doing about that? Well, first of all, why does Microsoft have a role in this at all? Why is Microsoft involved in what is really global diplomacy? And I'll say this, if you ask which entity, the United States government or Microsoft, has had more success in the last 4 years in driving a cybersecurity agenda globally, the answer is clear. We've had much greater success. We're a more trusted partner. We contribute more thoughtful initiatives to this space, and we work harder at what needs to be done in this space. And that's just, we're only comparing ourselves to the world's largest, most influential democracy. So we're doing this work because it needs to be done, and there's a vacuum of leadership, and there's a vacuum in ideas that we think we can help fill. And as Brad points out, there is something unique about cyberspace as a domain of global conflict. This is something that is owned by, created by, owned by, evolved by, and protected by private industry. And so governments are playing within these private assets to attack one another, to attack enterprises, to steal intellectual property, to try to impact democratic processes, and to disrupt society. And that's why we believe we have a role to play in pushing for these rules. So there's two ways in particular I want to mention that we have made some real significant strides just in the last couple of years as we start down this long path of achieving a Digital Geneva Convention. And the first is the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace. We heard a couple years ago that the French government was planning to have a major convention in Paris at the time of the centennial of the First World War armistice last November. And they wanted to bring the world's leaders together and talk about initiatives for peace. And we suggested that one of those be an initiative around cyber peace and what we can do to increase the safety of citizens on the internet. The French government was very enthusiastic about that idea, worked with us and other governments, and drafted these 9 principles and asked governments, civil society, and industry to come together and endorse these principles and say, yes, we agree, these are rules that should govern all of our behavior in cyberspace. And many of these principles had previously been articulated by various policy organizations, the United Nations and others, as what they call norms, which means just kind of rules that we like, that we come up and we study and we articulate. But this was a place where they pulled all of those together and they added 2 very important ones. Number 2, protect the public core of the internet. And number 3, protect malign foreign interference in election processes, which is one we really pushed hard to have added. And then we wanted to support the French government in getting endorsements. So we went out and others went out and sought endorsements of the Paris Call. And in the end, when it was launched last year, there were over 550 endorsers of the Paris Call, including over 60 governments, including 4 of the 5 so-called Five Eyes governments. So Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the UK all signed. Every NATO country except Turkey and one other all signed. And of course, the missing signatory was the United States. And we work hard to try to get the United States to sign the Paris Call. We haven't yet succeeded. They don't like the process that was used. But more importantly, as we know, the current administration does not support multilateral and multi-stakeholder solutions to global problems. They don't endorse these solutions and they don't participate for the most part. And we think that's a mistake, because in this arena, as I already described, we think it's critical to have multi-stakeholder solutions because the solutions necessarily, inherently require the cooperation and collaboration of government and the private sector, which owns and operates and creates these resources. Paris Call anniversary is coming up shortly. You should expect to hear some new announcements about a significant increase in the total number of signatories. More countries are signing, more industry participants, more civil society participants. And we are working now to create communities around each of these principles to go out and talk about how do we actually drive and adopt rules of behavior and other policies that will support each of these principles. It's a big step forward in our effort to get to a global set of rules. But we also recognize that it's not enough to ask governments to do things. The technology industry itself needed to step forward, because the technology industry had not itself said, hey, these are rules that we think we should live by in this space. And so we created the Cybersecurity Tech Accord, and we just asked companies to endorse these 4 very basic principles: that we would protect our users and customers, that we would oppose cyber attacks on civilians and civilian enterprises and innocent enterprises during times of peace, that we would increase cybersecurity capability everywhere, and that we would help one another and all of our customers respond in the case of a cyber attack. And when we launched this initiative a year and a half ago, we found 36 other companies from around the world willing to endorse this set of principles with us. The good news is the Cybersecurity Tech Accord is going to announce, this is news, breaking it here, please don't spread it around the world because we're going to announce it next week, that the Cybersecurity Tech Accord is now over 120 companies around the world that have signed these principles. And they not only have signed these principles, but this group meets on a very regular basis with very lightweight governance process to discuss and endorse cybersecurity policies and cybersecurity processes that they support. And the process has become a trusted voice of the industry around the world. When I travel to world capitals and talk about these challenges, the world capitals want to hear from the Cybersecurity Tech Accord what their view is. So we now have a group of like-minded companies that have come together to share a collaborative approach to what we need to do to get to improve the security and safety of the online community. And this is some of the logos of the companies. There's a wide range of very recognizable companies, truly from around the world, that have endorsed these principles. Not enough of the major U.S. technology companies, unfortunately, despite our repeated efforts. But we do have Facebook, and we're continuing to work with the others to see if we can get them to join. So I want to pivot to our Defending Democracy program. In 2016, during the Democratic National Convention, Microsoft provided security for the convention. We also provided security for the Republican National Convention. But the Democratic Convention, during that time, we saw that a group that we were tracking through an organization at Microsoft called the Microsoft Threat Information Center, or MISTIC. And MISTIC tracks the activity of 70 nation-state activity organizations during the course of a year, 30 of them on a regular daily basis. We watch for their activity. We try to see what they're up to. And my team has formed a close partnership with Mystic so that we can take that intelligence and figure out what can we go do with this? How can we make meaningful impact with this information that we're obtaining from that effort? And one of the things we saw was that a group we call Strontium, these groups have many different names depending on who you're talking to, but it's also known as APT28 or Fancy Bear. And for those who followed this part of the world, you'll know that this is the group that was indicted in the Mueller indictment and designated as the organization primarily responsible for the hacks in the 2016 campaign and the disclosure of information that resulted. But they've been involved in a wide variety of cyber attacks for a very long time. The Mueller indictment gets very specific and names particular individuals in the Russian GRU as those responsible for the activities of this group. We saw that they had registered a whole bunch of fake Microsoft domains, domain names, website names that look like but aren't quite Microsoft names. So we went to court and we got an order transferring all of those domains to a sinkhole we maintain in our digital crimes unit that we use for doing cybercrime work. And we went to the court and said, please seal this order until we execute it. We execute it by going to the registrars and registries that maintain the domain names, getting the court order that transfers all the traffic that's going to those domains to our sinkhole, so that effectively the Russian spy group loses control of the domain names that they were using for whatever nefarious purpose they were up to. And that was the beginning of our battle against Strontium. We've now been to court a dozen times. We've taken down 100 domains that they use, and we track their activity and talk about it pretty frequently. Just recently, earlier this year, I wrote a blog in which we talked about a whole bunch of work Strontium was doing trying to target a range of public sector and academic targets in Europe, which was kind of the first step that they use when they're starting an effort to disrupt elections. They start by looking at who are the policy influencers that we should hack into in order to disrupt this effort. And so we talked about that. And then as David mentioned, yesterday or the day before yesterday, we published a blog announcing that we'd seen them attempting to hack a number of global anti-doping agencies and international and national sports authorities, all presumably in advance of next summer's Olympics. And conveniently, just before it was announced by the World Anti-Doping Association that they were continuing their investigation of the Russian effort to distort their own doping data and potentially exclude Russian athletes from the Olympics again. So what have we done? Well, through our Defending Democracy program, which we established a year and a half ago, we have 3 pillars. First, how do we defend the campaigns themselves? And we've done that in 2 ways. We announced a service we called AccountGuard, in which we will watch, if you are an Office 365 customer and you're involved with a campaign or the political process in any way, we will watch your email for you, and if we see that any nation state is attacking you, we will notify you and help you defend against that We do training around the world for campaigns and other related political systems about how to be secure in the campaign process, and we notify and help you if you are attacked. And we've got that now expanded to 26 countries around the globe. We started in the US, but we've expanded to other democracies. We have over 60,000 accounts that we're tracking. We've done over 900 notifications of attempted and sometimes successful attacks in a year and a half. We also learned, though, that some campaigns did not use this because they weren't Office 365 customers, because they told us two things. Office 365 was too expensive for campaigns, and it was too hard to deploy in a really secure way. So we went back to our Microsoft 365 team, and we came up with a new offering, Microsoft 365 for campaigns, which, unlike AccountGuard, which is free, Microsoft 365 does require a subscription, but we are offering it at our nonprofit subscription rate, which is very, very inexpensive. So campaigns can afford Microsoft 365 for campaigns, and it comes with a number of pre-configured wizards so that it's very easy with simple clicks to configure it for your enterprise, for your campaign in the most secure possible way. And already those wizards have proven so popular that we're just now announcing that we're going to make them available for small and medium-sized businesses as well as campaigns. It's a place where my team, innovating for the campaign space, has actually driven features that are acceptable and interesting and valuable to a much broader community. But we're finding Microsoft 365 for campaigns is also super popular and has been adopted by a number of the presidential campaigns already. So then, what about elections themselves? You read every day about how some 7-year-old has hacked a voting machine or some similar problem with voting machines, and we know for sure that the Russians targeted the election process in every one of the 50 states in 2016. They were successful in some form of intrusion in 21 of the 50 states. There's no evidence that they actually affected the vote in any state, but that's not for want of trying, and we anticipate that they will try harder and do better in 2020. So a year ago, the team came to me and said they had an idea for a technology solution. Would I invest in building this system? And we did. We spent over $1 million, and we created ElectionGuard. ElectionGuard is free. We've made it an open source project on GitHub, the world's most popular open source development platform, which Microsoft recently acquired. It's free, it's open source, anybody can adopt it. We're working with the voting machine vendors, which is a relatively small community in the United States, but we have 100% of that market working with us, trying to get them to adopt ElectionGuard technology. What does it do? If ElectionGuard is adopted and put into the voting process, and it can be electronic ballot machines like you see here, it can be handwritten ballots that then get scanned like happens in many states. But if you adopt ElectionGuard technology as part of your process, you will have the most secure, trusted, and verifiable election ever in history. The way it works is when you vote, your vote gets encrypted with high quality encryption. What's key to that is that a guy at Microsoft who worked with us on this project invented something, a particular form of what is called homomorphic encryption, which enables simple arithmetic operations like addition to happen on encrypted data without decrypting it. So your vote gets encrypted the minute you cast it, and it's never decrypted. No one can ever change it, no one can ever see it, but it can be accurately tallied. Not only that, but we give you as the voter a code. And when the election's over, you can go online with your code and actually see, for the first time ever in history, that your vote was actually counted and not changed. And voting officials, the press, third-party watchdogs, League of Women Voters, whoever's interested, can build something called a verifier application. They can run against the reported results of the election and see that it was properly counted and not modified. And we support paper ballots as well, so that you can have a paper ballot as a backup. We support what are called risk-limiting audits, so you can audit the results after the election. And we support, very importantly, all kinds of accessibility features with the prototype devices we built that you see demonstrated on the slide to show off this technology. And we're demonstrating those in DC and here in our offices in Redmond for people who are interested. Then the other thing that you've all heard about is disinformation and how the Russians and other adversaries work to distort the information we see and hear and how we think about public policy issues. And this is an express part of their, especially the Russians' policy towards the West, is to try to create conflict on key social issues. And they call out, in particular, race and abortion as the issues to focus on in the United States and create conflict. They try to get the two opposing sides energized to get violent and to be extreme as much as they possibly can. And they worked on that with some success in 2016, and we all anticipate them doing even more of that in 2020. So there's two things that we've done in this space. One is we learn of and are strong supporters of NewsGuard. NewsGuard is a service created by two journalists from the New York Times and from the Wall Street Journal. They have a whole team of journalists, and they look at every website that pretends to be a purveyor of news, and they give it a rating as to whether it follows journalistic principles or not. And in your browser, if it supports NewsGuard, which Microsoft Edge does and other browsers do, some other browsers do, they're still working to get broader distribution. But when you do your search, you will see immediately a red, green, or yellow shield that will tell you whether this is a trusted, journalistically trusted source of information or not. And I'd love to talk more about that. Super valuable tool. It's really kind of fun to do searches and look to see which responses you get are coming from green sources and which are red and why. But it's a useful tool of the type that we think is going to be important, which is providing consumers with more information about which sources of information are really reliable and which are not. And I'm going to end with, unfortunately, kind of a down note, which is deepfakes. So deepfakes is a term that is assigned to the idea of creating synthetic media that is misleading. And we've seen a little bit of this with the Nancy Pelosi video that got slowed down so it seemed like she was slurring her speech, or the video of the journalist in the press room at the White House that was also mildly slowed down to make it look like his pushing of a page in the press room was much more violent than it truly was when you see it in real speed. Those are very basic things. The technology that exists today, anybody can capture 2 or 3 sentences of almost any speaker and then synthesize that same speaker saying anything you want that person to say almost undetectably. The technology is already there for audio. For video, it's increasing at an incredible rate, the ability to synthesize video, to put realistic images together with fake or synthetic images. Now, of course, this is great stuff for the creative industry, for the movie industry, for a wide variety of completely legitimate purposes. But you can also see how this is a technology that needs to be carefully regulated as to how it's used, carefully understood by the consuming public. You might see images that are completely fake and undetectably completely fake. So there's a lot of concern about this at the federal level. Had a meeting with a number of people in the intelligence community recently about it. There's a lot of work going into detection technology, but the way artificial intelligence works, detection technology will always lose because you just take the algorithm of the detection and you build it into your artificial intelligence system and you improve your system of creating synthetic media so it can't be detected by the detection algorithm. We are supporting research that's going on at Columbia, at Oxford, into what we can do. We joined the Deepfake Challenge along with Facebook and the Partnership for AI. We have a team that is working across our company on what else can we do to, again, find and notify users what visual information they see that's authentic and what is not. And this is a big, big emphasis for us going into 2020. I'm out of time. I would love to take some questions. And thanks so much for the time and the opportunity to talk with you. pass the mics around.
We have a question over here. Jaime?
Yeah. Hello, I'm Jaime Mendez. Thank you for your time. And wow, Paris call. I'm really wondering why the United States didn't sign on that. But more importantly, not importantly, I'm curious. I use Google Chrome a lot over Microsoft Edge, but sometimes I use the news on there. What is the difference in security matters would Edge be compared to Chrome?
Well, Chrome and Edge are both really high-quality browsers, and so you get great results from both. And you can quibble, and my Edge team would shoot me for saying this. They'd say, no, we're better. Look at all these tests we've done. And I'd say both browsers are equally high quality and equally secure to the extent browsers are secure. One difference, though, today is that Google is not supporting NewsGuard, so you don't get the NewsGuard ratings with Chrome unless you separately install it, which you can. Whereas Edge is building it in and distributing it with Edge, so you get it built in. But for all practical purposes, in terms of security features, they're equivalent. Google builds good stuff.
We have a question from Pete Delaney.
Well, again, thank you for being here. My question has to do with Zuckerberg and Facebook. He recently testified that, whether it's true or false, we're going to post it. How does that fit into your discussion today? And do you come down? Is there a way to somehow regulate that? I know that CNN, MSNBC, for example, refused to run certain political ads because they were blatantly untrue. Zuckerberg says it really doesn't matter. What do you say about that?
It's a really interesting area because there's several different pieces. First of all, political ads. So Microsoft, on our advertising platforms, we've elected not to accept political ads. And that's true for LinkedIn, it's for Microsoft. And that's true of others in the community as well. Not Facebook, they make a lot of money from political ads. They did say that they would take down political speech if it's false, and they have big teams of people that are trying to make those judgments, but not political ads. That's just a policy decision they've made, which is obviously informed by the economics around the amount of money they make from political ads. Challenge we have here, and I think we're out of time, but I want to close with this is another thing, just like that whole public-private aspect and the fact that private organizations like Microsoft are increasingly being involved in diplomacy, this is kind of a flip side, especially in the United States, where we see increasing pressures around the world to regulate the content that people can see. Now, in every other country, there isn't a First Amendment that restricts government's ability to restrict content that people can see. And so what governments are doing is they're putting pressure on the technology industry to do what government can't do, which is restrict what people can see. So I think all of us, and I know for certain from Microsoft's perspective, we understand a very great responsibility in this space. And I have a team, one of the teams in my organization, relatively new, called Digital Safety, that's responsible for all content moderation on Microsoft's platforms, which today is focused on child exploitation and extreme violence and terrorist content. Someplace that we've also invested in global resolutions and something called the Christchurch Call, which came out after the horrific Christchurch shooting was streamed live on the internet. And so we are now cooperating with Facebook, with Google, with others, with Twitter, on an organization that we've established to set up a crisis incident protocol. So when one of those things happens, we all work together, notify one another, find it, take it down, block it on our platforms, so that kind of extreme violence is not available. And that's something new that we're working through right now. But it's a very interesting area where government, especially the US government, would like to influence the content that you can see, but they can't enact laws constitutionally to do that. But around the world, we are now facing all kinds of content regulations in country after country that are inconsistent, that each government says should be applied globally. In fact, there's recent European court decisions saying it can be applied globally. So it's a really interesting challenge, especially for the technology industry. Thank you so much.